Gary R. Mormino is the Frank E. Duckwall Professor Emeritus in History at the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. He continues to teach a class in modern Florida and World War II. Presently, he is the scholar in residence at the Florida Humanities. He holds a PhD from the University of North Carolina, where he met David Colburn and George Pozzetta. His first book, Immigrants on the Hill, Italians in St. Louis, was published by University of Illinois Press and received the Howard Marraro Prize for the best work in Italian history. In 1987, he collaborated with George Pozzetta in the publication of The Immigrant World of Ybor City, University of Illinois Press. In 2005, Mormino wrote Land of Sunshine, State of Dreams, A Social History of Modern Florida. The book was adapted for the PBS documentary, The Florida Dream, which received a regional Emmy. In 2012, Florida Trend conveyed the honor of Florida Icon. That same year, he was honored by the Florida House in Washington, D.C. for his literary accomplishments. In 2015, he was the recipient of the Florida Humanities Council's Lifetime Achievement in Writing. In 2020, the University Press of Florida published Millard Fillmore Caldwell, Governing on the Wrong Side of History. And he is finishing a new book, Florida Dreams Amid the Storms, a study of Florida from 2000 to 2010. So please join me in welcoming the esteemed Dr. Gary Mormino. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that gracious introduction. Hold on, we're fixing the screen for everyone. Okay, thank you. So I've been teaching a class in Florida and food for about 10 or 12 years now. And in some ways, if you think about it, Florida food history is world history. Food is everything in our lives. It's the geography of the fields that crops were grown. It's ethnicity, whether you're Italian or Jewish or African American. It's race. It's about modern technology and the food. So food history is really history in general. And I'd like to begin. Well, this is an interesting beginning, and I'm going to run through some of these early slides. But anyone out there identify the crop these women are picking? It's not necessarily a food, but I suppose you could eat it. And the answer is gladiolas. And you may think, well, what does that have to do with food history? So I'm giving a talk at the Audubon Club in Sanibel, Florida, on the West Coast a few years ago. And I asked them this question. No one could identify gladiolas. I said, do you realize the road that leads to Sanibel Island is Gladiola Boulevard? That crop was grown right out on the main side not that long ago. And the point here is that we often forget where the food comes from. And that's very important, I think, in our new relationship with food, that we're aware of, who picked the crops, et cetera. Let's begin with the native Floridians. These were the Tamuqua Indians. And I'm going to be coming back to this artist named Jacques Lemoyne. Someone should do a movie about him. Tell me this is not a great plot. So in 1565, French Huguenots arrived in Northeast Florida, where present-day Jacksonville is on the St. Johns River. And one of the colonists was a cartographer artist named Jacques Lemoyne. And what happened a few months after they arrived is the Spanish Catholics discovered them and annihilated most of the colony. But Lemoyne was one of the very few who escaped. And when he was in Florida, what we don't know is whether he sketched these future pictures or he just kept them in his mind. But when he returned to Europe, to Flanders, he published many of these in what's the process known? Engravings.
No, you know what? I have
engravings. So this is what you'll notice there he wrote, there's a time of year when the natives feast. For this purpose, they choose special cooks. That's kind of a universal. We all do this today. Thanksgiving, religious holidays, secular holidays. That's an interesting, I don't think he colorized these. I think these were colorized later, but the food they're preparing, that maybe that's green pea soup, I'm not sure. This is, in fact, in the introduction to another speaker, you mentioned the black drink, which I'm not sure what that has to do with Africa, but the black drink, Lemoyne said before battle, before sporting events, they played a game called ball. They would grind the holly, the cherry, they wouldn't use the cherries, but they would use the leaves, and they would take the leaves, they would blacken them in a pot, and then pour boiling water over. So it's more of a tea than a coffee, but the caffeine is apparently, your body takes an enormous hit. It's like drinking 100 lattes at once. So and then what you do is you vomit after you've consumed the black drink. The Latin name, by the way, is Ilex vomitorium, which tells you a little bit about the drink. But apparently after you vomit, you have this super energy. So this is the Native American, the first caffeine hit in America. This is a nursery plant, I suspect, found outside many of your homes. Certainly you'll find this at schools, in parks. It's a holly plant. It's not a holly plant, but it's a green plant that looks a little like a thick fern, but the natives called it kunti, and the Latin name is Zora floridana. What you do is you eat the root. You'll notice the picture on the right. Those are kunti roots. And through trial and error, they discovered that if you took a bite from a kunti root, you died of poison. But if you ground the root and then filtered it through water and dried it several times, you produced a flour-like substance that is today's arrowroot. And on the Florida frontier, this was very valuable because flour tended to be moldy and would sour easily. Kunti would not. By the way, I suspect there was a kunti mill not far from Delray Beach. The kunti belt in Florida is the high pine ridge that ran from Miami to Palm Beach County. And kunti, there were actually kunti mills in Florida grown. Now, this is interesting. This is your exam for the day. You're to match the city with the crop. And today, this is really hard to do, but this is really an old quiz. So Sarasota and Sanford, what crop on the right, what crop was grown in Sarasota and Sanford? And the answer is celery. In Sanford High School, by the way, the class rings has celery leaves, kind of says filigree. If you've been to Sarasota lately, there's not a lot of agriculture going on in Sarasota. It's a pretty urbane place. But Sarasota, through the 40s, grew a lot of celery. Celery was considered one of these crops, kind of a crop for the emerging middle class. Dade City, I bet not a single one of your listeners, viewers, can match Dade City with kumquats. There's actually Dade City is in Pasco County, and there's an annual kumquat festival. One of the students from my class this semester is doing a history of the kumquat festival. Pine Island, that's on the West Coast, not far from Fort Myers. Mangoes grown very few places outside South Florida. Monticello, not Monticello, but Monticello is pecans. The hardest one may be Weewahitchka, both to pronounce, but it is honey, Tupelo honey. And the Tupelo is one of the more, next time you're in the honey aisle of Publix, look for Tupelo honey. It's very expensive. And if you've seen the movie Yuli's Gold 15 years ago, it's about how precious Tupelo honey is. Weewahitchka is, if you're in Apalachicola and you go about an hour north, you hit Weewahitchka. Hastings is the potato capital of Florida, outside St. Augustine. LaBelle, anyone know LaBelle? Swamp cabbage. Now, see, here's where I miss not having your hands. If I would ask you, how many of you have eaten hearts of palm? Almost every hand would go up. And if I'd ask, how many of you have eaten swamp cabbage? No hands. It's the same thing, except that a good entrepreneur can charge more for hearts of palm. Well, LaBelle is up the Caloosahatchee River from Fort Myers. Pompano Beach, and I should have put also Delray Beach, were famous for tomatoes at one point in the early 20th century. Pompano Beach even more so because, actually Pompano Beach, let me take that back. Pompano Beach was better known for green beans. Delray Beach a little more for tomatoes, but the nickname of the Pompano Beach athletic team until a few years ago was the Pompano Beach Bean Pickers. Is that a great name, by the way? Ruskin and Immokalee, and earlier Delray Beach tomatoes. Only Immokalee today remains. Those other two have been way developed. Masaryk Town, named for the first Czech president after World War II. Chickens. They were Czechoslovakian chicken farmers who came in the 1940s. Zellwood, famous for sweet corn, not so much anymore. And Homestead, mangoes, and almost anything. You can grow almost anything in Homestead, Florida. Now, to illustrate my point, some of you may be disbelievers saying, yeah, he says so, but show me the... this is celery growing at the Palmer Farms. Bertha Palmer was the wealthiest widow in America, the wife of Potter Palmer. My wife and I honeymooned at the Palmer house in Chicago. But anyway, she took her fortune to Sarasota in the early 20th century, and it turned out she was a very shrewd businesswoman. And among the things she invested in was Celery Farms. Sanford, you can see the Celery Farms, the steamboats about to pick up the celery shipments there. Look at this. Is this a great photo? I don't know if this is a doctored photo, if this is fake news, but I'm guessing. But look, this is probably virgin muckland in Largo, which is in Pinellas County, not far from my home. But those are probably the first harvest of cabbage. Have you ever seen cabbage that size before? This is lettuce growing. Notice the spelling of lettuce in the upper right. Probably an unusual word at one time. And this is Delray Beach. Actually, it's closer to Boca Raton. And there's a new book out called Yamato Colony. And I bet every viewer today has been to Murakami Gardens. Before there was a Murakami Gardens, there was a Japanese colony at what would become Boca Raton. They spelled it then Ratone. And a very productive colony producing lots of tomatoes and vegetables. And it disintegrated by the time of Pearl Harbor. But one of the organizers, I'm sorry, let me go. I thought I had this. One of the organizers by the name of George Murakami, he of Murakami Gardens, he's the one who donated the land. In fact, the colony was taken over by the Boca Raton airfield in World War II. But Mr. Murakami lived in Delray Beach until I think the 1950s. Some of you may have even run into him. He's just a remarkable character. So I am going to go back now and pick up. So this is what swamp cabbage looks like. Swamp cabbage is taken from a cabbage palm, the state tree of Florida, and it's you use it like you would kind of a hard squash, a gourd. This is Reedwood Hitchka Tupelo honey. And it's harvested, you have to go into the cypress swamps where the beehives are. This is a mango grove on Pine Island on the Gulf Coast. And this is, you haven't seen this lately in Delray Beach, I suspect, an agricultural fair. But Palm Beach, Broward County, even Dade County were predominantly agriculture until the 1930s and 40s. And you can see spraying the tomato fields as late as 1960 in Delray Beach. A rough transition from the urbanity of Palm Beach County and Delray Beach to mullet. I'm guessing mullet is not a big seller, smoked mullet, but it is on the Gulf Coast. I think you do have mullet there, but it's much more popular on the Gulf Coast. This is maybe the fish, if there's a fish that fed more poor Floridians than any other food, it was the mullet, the lowly mullet. Here's I took this photograph maybe 35, 40 years ago. Good luck finding a smoked mullet dinner for $1.75 today. It's more like $12, $15 today. This, my friends, is a properly bronzed smoked mullet. It takes talent to do this. You have to have the right fire at the right setting, the right spices. If you cook it too low, it's mushy. If you cook it too high, it's burned. But that is a proper smoked mullet. You also need fatty mullet in the right seasons.
Well,
Mullet has always had an image problem of being kind of a poor people's food. In the 1960s, the enlightened Florida legislature had a great idea. They changed the fish from mullet to lisa. The mullet industry also did this. Lisa is how mullet is pronounced in Portuguese. And of course, this was a public relations disaster. I'd say it's the most famous, but it's my hometown of St. Petersburg, Florida. But if you ever hear Ted Peters' famous smoked fish, they only have 2 items on the menu: smoked fish, 4 or 5 kinds, and cheeseburgers, which I think you would agree. What more in life do you need but smoked mullet and cheeseburgers? Interestingly, this is a great story of how in the recent era, the grouper sandwich has just become the go-to sandwich. If there was a state sandwich in Florida in 2021, I suspect it might be the grouper sandwich. What's fascinating about this is that for most of Florida history, the grouper was seen as kind of a lowly fish, not quite like a mullet, but not much above a lowlet. Unless you think I'm making this up, you can also see how lonely I am that I'm reading 1917 Florida newspapers. But look, this is just a fascinating discovery. It says in St. Petersburg, this is the context, it's 1917, World War I is raging. Already the French, the Belgians are starving, and Americans are afraid it can happen here too. So we're encouraged to eat much more fish. So the local newspaper has an editorial about we need to eat more mullet, more grouper. And they said, residents of St. Petersburg know all about grits, which is curious today because grits is never on the menu in 2021. This is when St. Petersburg was poor and much more southern. And it also says the residents here rather scorn grouper either as a sporting fish or for food. And it says, Grouper used to be so despised that the fish houses would not buy it. They could find no market for it. Thousands of pounds of grouper were thrown away each week. And further proof. So this is from the Miami Herald in 1940. So look at this, by the way. This is a fascinating fish ad. You can see at the top, that's fresh Florida lobster, 45 cents a pound. Stone crabs, 35 cents a pound. You'd probably pay $35 at Joe's Stone Crabs today. But then grouper is the cheapest thing on the menu. Grouper is 10 cents a pound. And if you go down 5 entrees, mullet is 10 cents a pound. So in 1940 in Miami, grouper and mullet sold for the same price. Astonishing. Grouper today, black grouper would cost you filleted $25 a pound in most seafood establishments. Here is Mirabella's in Tampa in 1953. Mullet or grouper is not even on the menu here. You have Pompano, very expensive fish at 65 cents. And this man here told me he thinks he's popular for popularizing grouper. So I'm interviewing him. By the way, he's holding a red snapper. And he said, in about 1960s, the early 60s, the food editor of the Tampa Tribune came by his fishmonger establishment. And she said, Buster was his nickname, Buster. All the housewives are complaining that the most popular fish, red snapper, pompano, kingfish, are so expensive now. Isn't there an alternative? He said, we should eat more grouper. It's not very fishy tasting. And you can, which if you think about it, that's probably why grouper is so popular now. It's not fishy tasting. Our tastes have really gotten to be bland. It's why we like Taco Bell as Mexican food or so-called Mexican food. If grouper was the food, or if mullet was the food that fed the masses, oysters are the shellfish that fed the masses. Probably no food fed more Floridians for a longer period than oysters. So this turtle mound at Volusia County, the largest Indian mound in Florida. So all of this was made by Native Americans. Most of this is oyster shells. It's been estimated there are probably 1 billion oyster shells there, which tells you how prolific oysters were and how determined Native Americans were. This is oysters at its most famous place, Apalachicola, which, by the way, if you've been there lately, it's a sad story. The problem today is Apalachicola just isn't getting sufficient amounts of fresh water. And oysters grow in this delicate balance of salt water and fresh water. And it may never recover. And there was a Supreme Court decision this week that ruled against the state of Florida in the lawsuit against Georgia for taking so much fresh water away. I have another PowerPoint, which you're probably not interested in, but it's called The Worst Jobs in Florida History. And this is one of the worst jobs would be shelling oysters and oyster cannery in Apalachicola, probably for 8 or 10 hours a day. Would you ever get the smell off your hands? And there's a cautionary parable here. We really blew it. I mean, there was so much abundance in Florida. There was so much fish. There were so many oysters. They were so cheap and abundant. We abused the land and the waters. So already by 1945, it's consumers advised, don't eat the local oysters, you may die. And why is this, you ask? At this time, almost all the Gulf communities were dumping their fresh sewage into Tampa Bay. Not good. This is one of my favorite stories. So the tiny community of Ozona. So North Pinellas County, some of you probably know Dunedin, the very tiny Gulf community. And on the St. Joseph Sound, on the opposite side of the bay, is Ozona, which may have the distinction of being one of the last middle-class waterfront communities, not today, but then. And a reporter in 1964 interviewed someone who was a fisherman there. And he said, you know, this was a paradise until last year. He said, you could go down with a bucket and you could dredge up in 60 seconds. I could have dinner. I could have oysters. I could have shrimp. And then they started dredging and filling in Dunedin. And now I go out with my barrel and it's silt. Don't abuse the land. Fernandina was the shrimp capital of Florida, up in Northeast Florida. Joe Stone Crabs. It's interesting, by the way, that Joe was an Orthodox Jew, but he made his fortune. There may be no better example of one establishment with one food than Joe Stone Crabs in Florida.
Joe Stone Crabs.
Joe Stone Crabs. An expensive first date, by the way, if anyone's thinking of taking a date there. Look at this. This is in the Florida Keys. Have you ever seen freshwater lobsters this size? My God, that's amazing. This is probably a poor man. By the way, back to Stone Crabs. There's a barrier island off Dunedin called Caladesi Island. And in the early 20th century, only one family was living there, including a little girl who every day rowed her rowboat across the bay to a school in Dunedin. And she said every day her mother would pack for her a cold sweet potato and a stone cold crab. And she said she was so embarrassed that her classmates used to laugh at her for being kind of a cracker, having to eat stone crab for lunch, if you could imagine the indignity of it all. Turtle. I know this is repulsive to many of you. Turtle was very, very popular once. This is from a canning label. This is outside Key West at a turtle cannery. One of the more interesting foods, I wish I had my hand-raising ability. How many of you have eaten conch, C-O-N-C-H? It's from a mollusk of the queen conch. And a more important question would be, how many of you have ever dove for a queen conch and then retrieved the mollusk inside it? That, my friends, is a very ugly or dirty task. It's not pretty. And then you have to take the outer skin off, otherwise it would break your tooth. But left is this delicious white meat that's very tough. You have to generally pound it. That's why cooking in chowder tenderizes it. And this is a man, he's about to take out the mollusk. And he is a conch living in the Keys. A conch means a native of the Bahamas. And he moved to the Keys. Our same artist, Mr. Jacques Lemoyne, also did an engraving of native agriculture in Florida. This is an astonishing print, by the way. This is a 16th century view of agriculture in Florida. And what's interesting about it is it's all wrong, even though he probably witnessed this, but he probably reimagined this back in Flanders. And I wish we could participate, but so what's wrong with it? Native Americans did not plant in rows. That's very European. They planted in mounds. So you scooped up a mound of dirt, you put a dead fish in the mound, and then you also put a green bean seed and a corn seed. And so you had three crops really coming together, the beans, and you also put a squash seed. The squash and corn would come up first, and the beans would have like a stalk from that. So, and the green beans injected nitrogen into the soil. The Native Americans were brilliant. The hair is also wrong. If any of you are art historians, you may say that hair is Renaissance hair, and think of Botticelli's Venus, Primavera. And the native implements, farming implements, are wrong. Other than that, Lemoyne nailed it. And notice the hair and the Native Americans, and this is Botticelli. We tend to be self-absorbed. Corn was poor people's food in Florida. People, particularly in North Florida, Central Florida, you had grits or a variety of corn several times a day for most of your life. And to give you an idea, in 1948, the city of Tampa, which you don't think of as a southern town, Tampa had a grist mill. Grist and grits, same thing. And you notice there's a 1 ton, a 2,000 pound stone grist, gritstone there, and they were doing thousands of pounds of grits a day out of there. This is a grits fanner. So what you would do if you ground your own grits, you had a lot of undesirable sediment in there, the chaff and things like that. And just as you would separate the wheat from the chaff, you would separate the corn from the outside kernel. And you wonder if there's a single grits fan left today. Look at that. There was still a grist mill as late as 1956. There's still one today, by the way, in Tallahassee. But look at Ms. Taylor's forearms. And she could be a shot putter. Look at that. Also, look at the size of the bag. That's a 30 or 40 pound bag of grits. When also a lot of ground corn went into cornbread. But cornbread by itself can be pretty dull. So you had to put interesting items. So crackling bread, what you would put in is pork cracklings, what do we call that? There's cracklings is what we call it. Or you'd put the chicken fat cracklings in to give it some flavor. Cornbread baked on a cast iron pan, kind of a classic Old South tradition. You mentioned fusion food in the introduction. Fusion food, it didn't start in 1960 in South Beach. It started in the 16th century when the Spanish came to Florida. They brought their foods from Spain. They also were bringing foods from Africa because of the Moorish population in Spain. So America is a land of fusion food. Intermarriage, war, trade, all this creates that beautiful Floridian food we call it, fusion food. To give you an idea how important biscuits were in the Old South, and Florida was part of the Old South, this is not a doctored headline. I found this in 1940. Apparently it's true. A couple got a divorce because his wife wouldn't fix biscuits for him. She liked classic white bread. Grounds for divorce. Chitlin bread. I don't want to get too gross here, but chitlins are hog intestines that you would put in grits. How many of you could, I bet not a single person in Palm Beach County could tell me what Georgia ice cream is. I don't see any hands. You can see my cat's tail on the screen. My cat knows it. Georgia ice cream is you take buttermilk and you put cornbread in. So you do buttermilk and cornbread. And the big question, of course, is do you drink it or do you use a spoon? You know, if you're on a first date, you should probably use a spoon, I suspect. This is the ultimate fusion transfer in America, was what we call the Columbian Exchange. So when Europeans and Africans came to the Americas and the Caribbean, they brought their foods and they adapted native foods. So the native foods were corn, beans, tomatoes, chocolate. It's quite extraordinary. But the Europeans were bringing, particularly on the meat side, cattle, pigs, horses, chickens. There was no such thing. I mean, think about this. Before 1492, no Italian had ever eaten a pizza with tomato on it. No Chinese had ever eaten a Szechuan pepper. All the peppers in the world came from the Americas. No Irishman had ever eaten an Irish stew with potatoes. Potatoes came from the Andes in South America. Even the Florida cowboy has European roots. I'm trying to think of the name escapes me in Spanish right now. But this is a famous engraving by the 19th century illustrator Frederick Remington of the American cowboy. This is the Spanish vaquero. But unlike the Western cowboy, notice they don't have Remingtons. They don't have Stetsons. This is a Florida cowboy. And the first cowboys, the vaqueros, came in Mexico and Florida, not Texas. One of the great Southern and Florida traditions is the annual cane grinding. I wonder how many, I've been to 2 or 3. I bet there aren't many in South Florida these days, but poor Floridians, poor white and black Floridians, always had a small field of sugarcane. And they would harvest this when the first cold front came through, and you had to harvest it immediately. You had 24 hours. You cut the cane. By the way, my grandfather came to America from Sicily as a cane cutter in Napoleonville, Louisiana. Worst job in America. But you cut the cane, and then you can see it. This is a kind of a mill where the millstone squeezed the juice, the kind of the sugar water from the sugar cane, and then you took the juice into a huge cast iron cauldron, and you boiled it for about 4 hours. I've witnessed this before. And what you've created is not sugar, but you've created cane syrup, which was used as a substitute for sugar by poor Floridians. Creating sugar is a much more complicated technological process. You have to get rid of the molasses in the cane syrup. Poor Floridians had to be resourceful. So you ate things like the gopher tortoise. It's now illegal, by the way. The gopher, which is a land tortoise, is the state tortoise. You could eat the sea turtles until the 1960s. We also ate possums. This is Catherine Harris at the Possum Festival in, I think, De Leon Springs. She lost, by the way. The orange may be the most iconic food in Florida. 19th century orange trees. Talk about vanishing institutions in Florida today. The roadside fruit stand. This is actually the roadside harvest where you'd bring the picked oranges and you'd select them in terms of size and quality. You'd take the mule and you'd go to the nearest railroad or steamboat ramp. And one of the wonderful memories of oranges in Florida is the citrus label. So I've got about 8 or 10 citrus labels here. Imagine being at a grocery store in Illinois, New York, and seeing these citrus labels on the wooden crates. The Capri, reminding people of the Neapolitan Contadina. Cracker Girl. When's the last time you've seen the sapsucker used as an advertisement? American barbecue is a legitimate Florida first food. In fact, probably Florida was the first southern state to have barbecue because of the Spaniards. The Spaniards incorporated the native Indian word in the Caribbean, barbacoa. Barbacoa became barbecue in Florida. But barbacoa did not mean, we often confuse, we use barbecue today as a noun. Or as a verb rather, I'm going to barbecue. Barbecue is a noun. Barbecue is the finished product, is the process. And in fact, barbacoa to Native Americans didn't mean the process. It meant the grates that these strange creatures are being grilled. This is proper barbecue, low and slow. Note the pit master there, the only African American there. There must be a couple 100 pounds of beef and pork roasting, slow cooking, low and slow. Every politician in Florida, such as Governor Ford Warren, had to taste the local barbecue. And Warren looked like he had been to a few barbecues. This is proper old style barbecue, and it's a vanished institution where you're doing whole hog barbecue. You just don't do this much anymore. It takes so much time, 12, 14 hours. You have to be there all day. It's much like Jewish delicatessens, even though Palm Beach is the last refuge of places like Flakowitz. Doing your own corned beef and brisket from scratch is kind of a vanishing institution across America. The ones who are willing to do it from start to finish. Now this is interesting. One of the newest barbecue go-to places in Florida is Little Haiti in Miami. Little Haiti used to be the black neighborhood in Florida. It's also, I wonder if anyone knew the answer to this, it's also the hottest real estate market in Miami in 2021. Now, why would the formerly poor black neighborhood, and the reason is it's the highest ground in Miami-Dade County. Businesses are now betting on climate change. Latin food in Ybor City. This is the classic Cuban bread. And you'll notice something weird kind of dangling from the bread. That's the palmetto leaf used. And there's a huge debate. It doesn't really influence the taste of the bread. It probably tells the old bakers when, by the color of the palmetto leaf, when the bread is done. This is, if there's a classic fusion food in Florida, it's Little Miami, Little Havana, Moros y Cristianos. It literally means in Spanish, Moors and Christians. Moors symbolizing the black beans, Christians, the white rice. Black beans are a native to the Caribbean. Rice is native to the old world, brought to Florida. And this is the proper Cuban bread. This is Tampa, not Miami. Tampa has the market on authentic Cuban bread. It's just different. It's not necessarily better. It's slightly different taste. One of the great meals in Florida is you take plantains, and generally you cut them up and you just fry them. But if you're having guests and you want to be formal, you smash the plantains and you put them in a little mill, a little press that's circular, and you have kind of for guest plantains called tostones. This is a Cuban, Sicilian, Caribbean thing called crab. It's enchilado. It's big debate on how to pronounce it, but it's crab and spaghetti sauce. If there's when done well, is there anything better than flan? Kind of Spanish, Cuban custard, but it's often not done well these days. Cuban coffee. This is Key West, Pepe's Cafe, 1938. I'd do anything to go to a time machine to interview this guy about the Cuban Revolution of 1868. And this is one of my favorite photographs. It's Key West, 1945. You'll notice you can buy tickets to Havana. It says Sidewalk Cafe, American and Spanish, excellent coffee. probably they really mean Cuban coffee, but you can charge more if you call it Spanish coffee. But the best is you can get a turtle burger sandwich in Key West in 1945. If there's a perfect soup out of Spanish Florida, you would probably, most of you would probably say, well, it should be gazpacho. Gazpacho is really more Spanish summer soup. You rarely saw this on Spanish menus. Okay.
About food in Florida. It started at 1. I don't know. I think it only goes for an hour, but it's
Okay. So this is, in my selection, this is the greatest Spanish soup in Florida.
See if we get more. I'll tell you, that soup in the Azores, that chicken.
And this is Caldo Gallego, which simply means Galician soup. Gallego means a resident from Galicia in eastern Spain. But this has white northern beans. It has collard greens. It has chorizo, Spanish sausage. It has Spanish ham and potatoes and a ham broth. Oh my God, this is so good. Okay, one last theme. How did we get key lime pie? And you're supposed to be polled, by the way. So if there's any way of voting, what's your vote for? What should be the state pie of Florida? Should it be sweet potato pie? Should it be pecan pie? Should it be key lime pie? And of course, the state pie is key lime now. But the story is a great story. First, you need key limes. Key limes are from China. Somehow they got to the Middle Keys in the Key West area, and they grew very well on rocky soil in places like Isla Morada, Marathon, where you had very little soil. So you had, and they used the lime, the sour orange, the sour lime there, almost like you would today with hot sauce. And what they would do is they'd have a container like the container on the right. You'd squeeze the key lime juice, and then you'd put about a half an inch of salt in the top, and you'd put a cork. So it never sour. Well, it's obviously sour, but you'd use this on fish. You'd use this on everything, black beans and rice. So you had, and if you lived on the Middle Keys, you had tremendous variety of seafood, but things like you really couldn't store flour there. It was too hot and humid. You couldn't have milk there because there's nowhere to graze cattle. And you also had, it was very, so what did you have for dessert? And two things had to be invented to create key lime pie. In the 1860s, Gail Borden in New York perfected condensed milk. And then a year later, he perfected sweetened condensed milk. By putting the sugar in the condensed milk, you retarded bacteria. So now people in the Florida Keys you had a can of sweet condensed milk and you had key lime juice. They also had eggs, by the way. Chickens could roam there. But the problem is you need a crust to create some kind of dessert. And not far after Borden's milk came out, Sylvester Graham, kind of a health food quack, perfected and invented the graham cracker, which is unrefined wheat flour. And he put a little sugar in it, pressed it and baked it into a cracker. And in those cellophane leaves, it would last forever. So people could order graham crackers. And thus you had the key lime pie. So think of it. You simply needed water and crushed graham crackers for a crust. You might put your egg yolk in the key lime juice with the sweetened condensed milk. There's your custard. All you got to do is mix it, put it in the pie shell, and the egg white, you could make a meringue. Voila, there's key lime pie. And housewives along the A1A, or Highway 1 rather, would sell slices of key lime pie to pedestrians and motorists. Not good luck at finding 5 cents a slice today, by the way. So you'd have these little tea rooms like this. So we're in this right here. This is a good place to end it. So I'm in Key West a few years ago. Most people go to taverns, right? I go to the Key West Public Library, and I find the oldest cookbook in Florida. And of course, I look for the recipe for key lime pie, and there's no recipe. Question, why not? And the answer is, be simple. Everyone already knew how to make key lime pie. You don't need a recipe. I just told you. You wet graham crackers crushed. You put the filling in the custard made of key lime juice, sweetened condensed milk, and an egg yolk. And you may put a meringue if you wish, but what's the point of gilding the lily? It's a perfect recipe. And with that, I'll take questions now. We have 10 minutes for questions or insults if you think I got something wrong. Insults are more interesting.
Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. If you want to stop sharing, stop your screen sharing, then we can see.
Lynn, you know how to do that?
Everyone.
Just stop sharing. Hold on a second.
You hit escape.
And then if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to type them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself. You can raise your hand.
No.
Do you have questions or comments?
Right there. There you go.
Anne has a question. Hi.
Bella, good to see you. Gary, wonderful, so fascinating. I wanted to mention about key lime pie.
Yes.
We're in Cedar Key, Florida.
Oh, yes.
Westville, and you know what a sleepy
I know where you're going.
So we bought popsicles for our grandchildren. They were pieces of key lime pie, Dunkin' chocolate. Oh, yeah. Yum. $7.95 a piece.
See, I thought you were going to say, did you ever go to the old hotel in Cedar Key? It's the oldest hotel in Florida. It's like 1850s.
Yeah.
I thought for sure you were going to sell. They have a famous house salad, which is the funkiest thing you've ever seen. It's made from lime sherbet, dates, lettuce, and a couple other items that make no sense except they come together perfectly in a salad. So next time you're there, go to the Old City Hotel. Cedar Key is the Island Hotel is the name of it. Cedar Key is a fascinating place.
It's fabulous. And my goodness, the clams.
Yeah, they're growing. It was once one of the oyster capitals of the universe, and now they're growing freshwater. They're not freshwater. They're growing clams.
Right.
So it's still only, the population of Cedar Key is still only like 700 people. Very small.
Very, very small.
But
wonderful,
thanks.
Florida. Thank you.
Uh-oh, we got somebody's screen on here. Let's see what's happening.
I didn't touch it.
No, wasn't you. Any other questions or comments?
Well, here's a question. What was a typical meal for the early pioneers? Well, the answer depends where you lived. If you lived in the Florida Keys, it would almost certainly be fish. And they often salted the fish for you never knew when the fish would stop biting. But if it were inland, it would probably be venison or gopher torta. I mean, what's interesting, the students are stunned when I tell them the most expensive item on a restaurant menu until the 1950s or 60s is chicken. Today, of course, chicken is the cheapest, but we weren't manufacturing chickens in giant warehouses like we do today. Chickens were free-range chickens. The real expense was it took like 6 months. By the way, I lived on a chicken farm growing up. I know my chickens, my Rhode Island Reds and my Plymouth Whites, so I don't want any feedback here, okay? So, but it took like 6 months from a chick to a spring hen. And And today it's like 3 weeks and lots of antibiotics. It's not pretty, but the chicken is also so much bigger today. I bet many of your viewers, your ancestors came out of Russia. They discovered a few years ago that logically, the one piece of the chicken that's not eaten very often in America are the thighs. And they discovered the Russians were chicken hungry, and we sold them thighs. They could not believe it. The thighs were bigger than the chickens. That's how big chickens are today.
Wow.
So what they wouldn't be eating unless the Sunday pastor was coming over as chicken, we ate a lot of pork, salted pork. Depending on season, a lot of vegetables. Cornbread, almost certainly.
I have a question. There's a couple other comments or questions as well, but one that I noticed was there was like the glaring absence of gators.
I
they
think
eat alligators?
I don't think so. I put it this way, I have not discovered this. I'm always asked this question. Eating gator became a novelty in the 1960s and 70s as a form of tourism, and also it's cheap. But in the Everglades with the Native Americans, there was such abundance of turtle and different types of fish. Why would you eat alligators? Now, they had an extraordinary relationship with gators, but eating, I don't think, unless I've missed something. And you're really talking about settlers. Now, if you were desperately hungry, sure. The question of sugarcane, I talked about sugarcane earlier. Sugarcane was a huge crop in Florida, and until Big Sugar arrived in the 1950s from Cuba, it tended to be small scale, family farms. So if you go to a sugar boil today in November or December, it's probably someone's farm doing it as a novelty, but that's what you would do. You have to cut the cane the day you boil the sugar. You have to cut the cane, press the sugar for the juice, and then you need a huge fire to turn the sugar into cane juice. And if you burn it, it's ruined. You need to know what you're doing.
Are there any places now where you can try mullet? That's a question from Lois.
I don't know Delray Beach, but in Tampa Bay, it's pretty easy. But mullet are more, the Gulf Coast is more mullet country, not the East Coast there. I bet if you went into a seafood shop, by the way, they're also becoming a vanished institution, the family seafood establishment that's been there 3 generations. When I would take students and adults for tours of Ybor City, we would go by the seafood establishment of Buster Agliano. And he would ask the adults there, and the question of the day is, he would point his finger and ask, so what's the first name of your fishmonger? So all of you, what's your first? And the answer typically with the kid at Publix, he said, are you kidding me? You trust the kid at Publix to, when you ask him, is the fish fresh? Where'd the grouper at Pompano come from? He said, you need a relationship with your fishmonger. And that's largely vanishing today because that's really hard business. And you don't have the fishermen, we don't have the connections we used to. So 20 years ago, you'd go to Fernandina, Florida. It was the shrimp capital of Florida. No more. We've overfished. And next time you go to Publix, look where, and if you ask about the shrimp, I bet the shrimp came from Thailand or Cambodia, places like that.
Wow. Someone else asked, what grows best in Fort Lauderdale?
Condominiums. Seriously, they asked the Orlando mayor of Orlando in the 1950s, the 1960s, after Disney arrived. He said, we stopped harvesting oranges and started harvesting tourists. And now the answer would be condominiums.
Yeah.
That's good.
No, really,
Good
it's
answer.
I mean, Broward and Palm Beach were once some of the, even as late as 10, 15 years ago, some of the largest, quote, urban agricultural counties in America. All much of the where you're living in Broward County, much of that was Everglades land, fabulously fertile, thousands of years of muck, and now the condos are growing on it.
Wow, this was fantastic. I know you have another meeting coming up, right? Are you out
Yes.
of?
The next meeting is 1920s Florida, so I'll be talking about Fort Lauderdale and Delray Beach in the 1920s. But thanks for having me. Feel free to, if people want to send their questions to you, you can send them to me.
Okay, sounds good.
Even insults would be fine.
No, this was fantastic. Thank you so very much, Dr. Mormino, for your time and for your expertise.
Enjoyed
we
it.
appreciate it. It was awesome to see you, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Be sure to sign up for next week with Chef Norman Van Aken at 6:30 next Thursday.
I know Norman and I did a show together.
You did?
He is fabulous.
Good. I'm looking forward to it. I think everyone is. It's going to be awesome. So this is a great program. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, have fun, go try some Florida seafood, and we'll see you next time.